Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading.
All our software today after we tried a test with some new upgrade that our computer couldn't handle. So, welcome to Nightcast on this March 17, 2014 edition of Nightcast. Barry Kendall does a fabulous job with our opening. We appreciate that opening, that he designed the language for it himself and recorded it, and it kind of hung up there tonight. Well, talk about hung up and something kind of reverberating or shaking. We had a 4.4 magnitude earthquake strike in Los Angeles at 6:25 a.m. local time. That'd be 13:25 Greenwich Mean Time this morning, rattling nerves, but as yet causing no reported injuries or deaths. Local broadcaster KCBS was in the middle of its morning news programs when presenters tell the earthquake jolt their studio.
In my house.
It's like dog party, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's funny.
It is funny to
watch.
watch.
An
earthquake.
Big earthquake right now.
Big earthquake.
That's
A really strong shaker right now.
Well, I remember when I was on the Ambassador College campus in Pasadena, California, when a quake struck in 1971, first quake I'd ever really been in, and first California quake for me too. And it happened at about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I was in bed, and in Grove Terrace, a dorm that was built with some degree of earthquake standard. It was a newer building, and I was still in bed, and wow, the building moved this way and then this way. It swayed, big swaying movements, and in my bed it felt like somebody, rocking my bed. It was wonderful, actually. And my friend Mark Siegel, now I was a freshman, he was a sophomore. I had met him and his parents in Florida, where I came into our church that sponsored the college, the private college that I attended shortly later. Mark was a sophomore that year, and sophomores, they tend to outdo the freshmen. You know, they'll get up 15 minutes earlier than the freshmen. You know, they got to outshine us a little bit. And Mark was in the Mark Siegel, now Courtney, and he was in the shower. And these showers in Grove Terrace, there are a whole bunch of them, and long bathroom, and they're just wide enough for you to open the door, get in. There's a wall on each side of you, wall right in front of your nose, and the door behind you. Well, the building was swaying in the direction not of where the door was, but the other way, thankfully, so it didn't throw him out the door. But Mark described the situation for him with that earthquake of being banged from one wall to the other wall. As the building would sway this way, you know, he'd bang against that wall, and as it would sway the other way, boom, he'd sway against, bang against the other wall. So back and forth as the building went, Mark was being thrown back and forth in the shower, wall to wall. And so, and nobody was really hurt in that earthquake either. The worst damage was the Mayfair dorm, which was old luxury mansion, tall building, maybe 4 stories high or so. Big chimney goes up the side of it and to the top. And it's on a hillside, and there's a wavy hill down from that building, and that chimney was not earthquake code, let's say, and those bricks from that chimney were strewn all down that hill, but thankfully that time of the morning not too many people were out. Nobody was injured by the bricks being strewn from the Mayfair building. They were strewn over a long distance down that hill and around, because that was a very powerful earthquake that morning. But we had that one this morning in California, 4.4, a little, not too far from Westwood. Now, I was going into the story next regarding a big story for the day, what happened with the voting in Crimea. And as a result of that, Russian President Vladimir Putin signing a decree recognizing Crimea as a sovereign state, paving the way for it to be absorbed into Russia. The decree said it had taken into account yesterday's referendum, Sunday's referendum in Crimea, in which officials said 97% of voters backed breaking away from Ukraine. The EU and the US said the referendum was illegal, and they each imposed sanctions on 21 officials from Russia and Ukraine. And here is President Obama speaking on that. We'll just give him a few words on this one.
Today I'm announcing a series of measures that will continue to increase the costs on Russia and on those responsible for what is happening in Ukraine.
Okay, so he's going to put sanctions. He's just saying he's going to put sanctions. Interesting thing, friends, is that, if I were to let him play on, you would hear him say that he's doing this by executive order. Let me let you hear just a little bit more of that.
First, as authorized by the executive order I signed 2 weeks ago, we are imposing sanctions on specific individuals responsible for undermining the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and government of Ukraine.
Okay, so he's done that by executive order. And, interesting thing is, honoring some NATO-type arrangements and what have you, but who's over NATO? Who's in charge of NATO? I got a little homework to do. Maybe you do, too. Maybe some of you know. You can educate me on that. But President Obama likes to do a lot of things by executive order. Instead of being the executive who carries out the laws of Congress, he sometimes writes them himself. And instead of just for the United States, he's now writing them for the rest of the world, as if it were, But maybe he's got some position over NATO as the military chief of the United States. I don't know. But we certainly know we're in for some rough times ahead. We're looking for the fifth seal to come into vogue. Let's just throw this chart up on the screen for a moment. This chart shows the 6 of the 7 seals of the book of Revelation. These 6 are described in the 6th chapter of the book of Revelation. And the first 4 of them are operative now. They're called the 4 horsemen and 4 horses and horsemen of the apocalypse. Apocalypse simply being the Greek word for revelation. And we're having a white, red, black, and pale green horse. The white one being a horse of religious deception, the red one being a horse of war, rumors of war and world war, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom, which we've had and are yet to have again. We're simply in a recess between round 2 and round 3 of world war. The black horse of famine, and the pale horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language in 3 different terms that Matthew, Mark, and Luke wrote up as loimus, seismus, and tarike, meaning the loimus meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt, the seismus meaning seismic activity such as commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, and commotions on the ground. And the example given in the Greek-English lexicons is earthquakes. And of course, more than earthquakes, it's also volcanic eruptions and wildfires and floods and a number of other things. But the earthquakes has it today with what happened in Los Angeles County, California this morning. Now, the EU and the U.S., on this story we were just covering with President Obama saying he's going to do sanctions against Russia, both the EU and the U.S. have agreed to impose travel bans and asset freezes against 21 officials from Russia and Ukraine. And again, that move follows yesterday's referendum in Crimea. And let me see, do we have another report on that? I believe we do. I believe we've got a report from Bridget Kendall. Let's see.
After last night's euphoria, now the consequences. In Crimea, the referendum result to break away from Ukraine was for Russian speakers a cause for celebration. But in Kiev and the West, it's an illegal move and must be resisted. So, both the EU and the United States today announced new sanctions.
The international community will continue to stand together to oppose any violations of Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. And continued Russian military intervention in Ukraine will only deepen Russia's diplomatic isolation.
These Western sanctions are aimed at those closely involved in trying to split off Crimea from Kiev. Travel bans on those behind the Russian military build-up and Crimean vote, and asset freezes. European sanctions on 21 people and 11 named by the Americans, including a deputy Russian prime minister, the ousted Ukrainian president, Viktor Yanukovych, and Crimea's separatist leaders. And there's a warning of more sanctions to follow. In Moscow, one of the officials targeted dismissed the sanctions as political blackmail. President Putin's reaction will come in a big speech he's giving tomorrow. In the meantime, his government has laid out tough conditions for negotiation and made clear it backs Crimea's call to reunite with Russia.
I expect the majority of the Ukrainian population will respect this convincing result.
So, what does Russia want? Well, firstly, constitutional reform to devolve powers to Ukraine's Russian-speaking regions, and a cast-iron UN guarantee that Ukraine will stay neutral and not join either the EU or NATO. It also wants Russian language to be given equal status to Ukrainian. So far, so good. But Russia also insists that Crimea's referendum vote to leave Ukraine must be respected. And there's no way either the West or Kiev will agree to that. Already it's been ruled out by Ukraine's acting president. We're ready for talks with Russia, he said today, but will never accept the annexation of our territory. So all Ukraine can do is dig in to protect its borders from further incursions as tensions with Russia set to escalate.
Okay, friends, there's the story on that, and we've got a story next for you from today at the White House. We told you last week that we'd be watching the news today regarding the president of the Palestinian Authority meeting with the president on March 17. Well, that did occur today, and in that meeting, U.S. President Barack Obama told Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas that he must take risk for peace. Now, he's speaking verbally when he says for peace, and all the news organizations are spelling that P-E-A-C-E. But friends, if you really analyze what he's saying, what the president is telling, what the president of the United States is telling the president of the Palestinian Authority, is that he must take risk for peace, P-I-E-C-E. For a piece of Israel. That's what they're talking about, you know. You got to take risks to get a bigger piece of Israel. You know, I'll have more to say on that in just a moment. Let me tell you the head notes on this story. Mr. Obama told reporters at the White House that the search for a two-state solution remained elusive, but he hoped to see progress in the coming weeks. Mr. Abbas said he considered the current round of talks a historic opportunity. Well, yeah, anytime you can take land away from Israel without having to fight for it, and when you do try to fight for it, you usually lose the fight in the war battles, and Israel gains more territory, which then becomes its territory by the rules of war. But no, people don't want to. They want to ignore that. They want to rewrite the rules. The U.S. wants both sides to approve a framework, quote unquote, a framework that the United States has come up with, a framework accord that would extend the negotiations beyond next month's deadline. Now, who set that deadline for next month for a final deal in July? You know, friends, Mr. Obama and Mr. Kerry brought the Israelis and the Palestinians back to the negotiating table last July after a 3-year hiatus, and said at that time that their objective was to achieve a final status agreement over the course of the next 9 months. But, you know, if they'd have left things alone, you know, there was a 3-year hiatus. You know, and so just leave it alone. And the little bit of problems that Israel had from Gaza, it went over there and bang, bang, boom, boomed and stopped. Gaza's harassment of Israel. You know, it knows how to take a strong hand. The Lion of Judah knows how to take a strong hand and deal with things. And so everything went to back burner. There'd been a 3-year hiatus, except for a little eruption there that Israel took a good hand with, and then went back to a time of relative peace. And if you'd leave it alone, President Obama, Secretary of State Kerry, of course, Secretary of State Kerry's, maybe he's simply just trying to please his boss, President Obama. If you just leave it alone, you know, and if it goes quiet, let a sleeping dog lie, you know, and let Israel take care of it. But they want to push this, take some risk, and grab off a bigger chunk, a bigger piece of Israel, you know, and every time the Palestinians, I'm sorry to say this, dear Palestinian friends, but every time you get more land out of Israel, you just wind up using that land as a base for lobbing more rockets at Israel. So don't kid me about that. You know, friends, ding, ding, wake up, see what's going on. Ugh. Let's go to another story. The Malaysia plane. There is a closed-circuit television that's been thought to show pilot security check that was emerged via YouTube that, again, is believed to show the pilots of the missing Malaysian Airlines plane shortly before it took off. The footage seems to show the plane's Zahari Ahmed Shah, 53-year-old, the pilot, and co-pilot Farik Abdul Hamid, 27-year-olds, passing through security at Kuala Lumpur Airport. Mr. Zahari joined Malaysia Airlines more than 30 years ago and was considered a very experienced pilot. Mr. Farik recently graduated to the cockpit of a Boeing 777, and here they are in that YouTube video. Now, there's no audio with this, just a little piece of YouTube video. And while you watch this, I've got an update. You'll see this in a little better format here in another piece of video. Let me bring that up for you. This one's a little clearer. More than 20 nations now have been asked to help search for the missing Malaysian Airlines plane. We read you a report last night, and I've got more for you. We may have time to read a little bit of tonight that reveals how a Kremlin report is saying the United States diverted that plane to a place that we announced last night. But the revelation in the mainstream media news is that the tracking system was cut off before the final words were transmitted, that the co-pilot spoke. But friends and relatives of the two pilots have said it's impossible that they could have been involved in the plane's disappearance, these pilots, that is. Here's a report on this with Jonah Fisher.
These are believed to be the last images of the pilots of flight MH370 as they passed through security in Kuala Lumpur. Their roles in the plane's disappearance once again in the spotlight. At the centre of the investigation, the exact sequence of events in the cockpit in the early hours of that fateful Saturday morning. We already knew the final words from the plane before it went silent and turned west were "all right, good night" to Malaysian air traffic control. Now the investigation team has announced they believe it was First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid who said those words.
Initial investigation indicated it was the co-pilot who basically spoke the last time it was recorded on tape.
The Malaysians are still far from clear as to exactly the sequence in which communications on board were turned off. 2 minutes after the good night message, they say the transponder was switched off. Whoever was flying the plane did not sign in with Vietnamese air traffic control, and the plane turned to the west. First Officer Farik's name first came up in this investigation when 2 women said they'd spent a flight with him in the cockpit, flirting and smoking cigarettes. But apart from this apparent disregard for the rules, there's little in his background to suggest a man capable of hijacking a plane. Passengers have also come under renewed scrutiny, in particular those who might know how to disable a plane's communication systems. Khairul Amri Silamat, a 29-year-old engineer for a private aviation company, is one who fits that profile. His father is sure his son isn't involved and still clings to the hope that he just might be found alive. People can say what they want about my son. I don't care, he told me. He's my son, and I know he's not involved. New maps released today show the areas being searched extended still further. At one extreme, it could be near the Caspian Sea, or to the south, just off the coast of Antarctica. Despite a huge multinational effort, the mystery of what happened to flight MH370 is still a long way from being solved.
And friends, last night I read to you a report out of the Kremlin regarding this thing that's totally different from what you're hearing in the mainstream news on this. And I've got an updated version of this report from the same source that we got the first one from. It's being labeled as a grim report prepared by the main intelligence directorate of the General Staff of the Armed Forces, the GRU, on Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, that report that came out last Friday, circulating in the Kremlin, that says within 24 hours of the aircraft's diversion to the highly secretive Indian Ocean U.S. military base located on the Diego Garcia atoll. And you know, I told you about this first report on this. I first told you about this report last night, friends, and I forewarned you that if this was upsetting to you, because this is very different from what you're hearing in all of the mainstream news today, if this is upsetting to you to hear this report, this is all I'm going to probably cover tonight before we sign off. And so maybe you want to go ahead and sign off early if you think this might trouble you. Just go ahead and click it off and tune in again tomorrow night. We'll just do our sign off tonight if it doesn't hang up, and and that'll be it till tomorrow night. But no less than 4 flights within the past week containing top American and Chinese disease scientists and experts have likewise been flown to that island, the Diego Garcia atoll, in the Diego Garcia atoll. According to the Kremlin report, the GRU report, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, also marked as China Southern Airlines Flight number 748 through a code share, was a scheduled passenger flight from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, to Beijing, China, when on March 8th, that fateful day on March 8th, Saturday, March 8th, this Boeing 777-200ER aircraft disappeared in flight with 227 passengers on board from 15 countries, most of whom were Chinese, and 12 crew members. Now, those are the details you've been hearing in the mainstream news. But as we previously noted in the Kremlin report that came out on last Friday, Russia puzzled over Malaysia Airlines' capture by the U.S. Navy of that Malaysian airline flight. The GRU had previously notified China's Ministry of State Security, MSS, of its suspicions regarding this flight due to its containing a highly suspicious cargo that had been offloaded in the Republic of Seychelles from the U.S.-flagged container ship MV Marsk, Alabama. First arousing the GRU's concerns regarding this highly suspicious cargo, this report continues, the GRU Kremlin report continues, was that after its unloading from the MV Marsk, Alabama on February 17, it's then transferred to Seychelles International Airport, where it was loaded on an Emirates flight bound for Kuala Lumpur International Airport in Malaysia, after first stopping over in Dubai. The 2 highly trained U.S. Navy SEALs who were guarding it were then found dead. The 2 U.S. Navy SEALs protecting this highly suspicious cargo, Mark Daniel Kennedy, 43, we identified these men to you last night, and Jeffrey Keith Reynolds, 44, were found dead under suspicious circumstances aboard the MV Marsk, Alabama. This report says, further raising Russian intelligence suspicions as they were both employed by the Virginia-based maritime security from the Trident Group, which was founded by U.S. Navy Special Operations personnel, SEALs, and senior U.S. Naval surface warfare officers, and has long been known by the GRU to protect vital transfers of both atomic and biological materials throughout the world. Now, I told you that much last night. Upon Flight 370's departure from Malaysia on March 8, this Kremlin GRU report continues, the GRU was notified by the MSS that they were going to divert it from its scheduled destination of Beijing to Hakoi Mailan International Airport, HAK, located in Henan Province, also known as Henan Island. Prior to this plane's entering into People Liberation Army PLA protected zones of the South China Sea, known as the Spratly Islands, however, this report continues, Flight 370 significantly deviated from its flight course and was tracked by VKO satellites and radar flying into the Indian Ocean region and completing its nearly 3,447 kilometer, 2,142 mile flight to Diego Garcia. In a confirmation of the GRU's assertion that Flight 370 was indeed flown to Diego Garcia, this report says satellite transmission data analyzed by U.S. investigators showed that this plane's most likely last known position was in a zone about 1,600 kilometers, 1,000 miles west of Perth, Australia, in the Indian Ocean. Most troubling to the GRU about Flight 370's diversion to Diego Garcia, this report says, was that it was nearly immediately followed by some of the top disease scientists and experts from the United States Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, and the Chinese Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the CCDCP, embarking to Diego Garcia on at least 4 flights. As to why both American and Chinese disease experts were taken to Diego Garcia, where Flight 370 is now known to be, this report says, has as yet not been answered by either of these governments after repeated foreign ministry requests for explanations and clarifications. What is to be known, this report says, is that as Malaysia has been forced to admit Flight 370 was indeed diverted from its flight path as the GRU had previously reported, and as at least 25 nations are now involved in searching for it, it remains a mystery as to what is actually occurring. Friends, that's it. We're out of time for tonight. Thank you for joining me for this Monday night report. God willing, and the creek don't rise and the NSA don't have me picked up tomorrow, we'll plan to be back tomorrow night with more news from the day's current world happenings related to the Bible and prophecy right here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth saying, so long, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on COGTV.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the COGTV.org video archive.